HB1, Senate File 1, clerk will call the roll.
Senator Bouchard.
Here.
Senator Larson.
Here.
Senator McCowan.
Here.
Senator Salazar.
Yes.
Representative Larson.
Here.
Representative Sherwood.
Here.
Representative Stith.
Here.
Representative Walters. Co-Chairman Nicholas.
Here.
Chairman Kinski.
Here.
Mr. Chairman, you have a quorum.
Thank you. By rule, actually, the chairmanship of the JCC rotates between days. The rule says the first day it's kicked off with the Senate side chairing, but of course, given that Representative Nicholas and I have a great relationship, and he's been here much longer than me, much longer, that he's never hesitated to jump in and correct me if I'm going astray. So, a bit of housekeeping. At 2:15, the Senate is gaveling back in, so hopefully we will have concluded our business by then. And our primary business today is to go through this, the differences between the House and the Senate. Staff will walk us through that. Chairman, Co-Chair, do you have anything in the way of an opening statement?
I would only,
Turn your mic on.
so the House gavels into two, so.
Okay, well, we'll step lively then. Did you have any opening comments other than that? As we go through this, we're going to be looking at differences, and it's kind of a human tendency to look at the whole and not the donut. But I think it is important to emphasize that there's a lot of overlap and agreement between the House and the Senate versions. Both fully funded the Department of Health, which is programs like nursing homes, hospitals, senior services, programs for developmentally disabled. Both funded the cost of living increase for K-12 and child development centers. Both restored funding for the Mineral Royalty Grant Program to provide emergency help to towns and counties. Funding for fighting forest and wildland fires, creation of a new district court. Funding for the Business Council for jobs creation. Full funding for the community college system, which is essential for job skills training. So there are differences, but I also think it's important to understand that there's a lot of overlap. There's a lot alike. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Richards, and if you'd walk us through agency by agency, it'd be greatly appreciated.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Don Richards, Legislative Service Office Budget Fiscal Administrator. Page 1 is, first of all of the amendments adopted by both the House side and the Senate side are included in this 11-page summary. There are a total of 133 amendments, and there are a couple of those that were actually adopted and then deleted in the same House. Your rules require you to take action on each and every one of the amendments. On the first page, there are a total of 26 amendments. These are all identical or mirror amendments in that both the House and the Senate have adopted the same position identically. I can walk through those at the chairman's discretion, or I can dispose of page 1 and begin on page 2.
Mr. Co-Chair, straight to page 2. You okay with that, or you want to go through page 1?
So my only question on page 1 are, it looks like there might be one or two typographical differences.
Which ones, Mr.
I'm looking at
Co-Chair?
number 3. Are those are all identical?
These are all identical, and based on prior years, we have had some typographical, a missing word or a typo, or we did not have any of those this year.
Okay. Yeah, I think we can.
Let's proceed to page 2.
Mr. Chairman, beginning on the top of page 2, item number 27 and 28 are both technical corrections. You will see that there are differences, but there are also similarities between these two. In all likelihood, you will potentially delete both of those and further amend one of them, depending upon all other action. So this is often one of the last actions of this committee. Item number 29, Senate.
So just before we go on, Don, what are the specific differences? Are they all just technical in nature, so there's no dollar signs, there's no other component?
Correct, there's no money involved. You will see, let's take the House, for example, you have 4 individual technical corrections. They all related to amendments on your side that the House did, or that the Senate did not have. with one exception, and that is House third reading amendment number 74 is amended, and the same occurs in Senate third reading amendment number 2 to add the introductory phrase of this other funds appropriation. This is $850,000 related to FNRPA for 2 FTE with the Wyoming County Commissioners Association. The rest of those are all an errant number, so the amendment to 3021 on the House side included S5 erroneously, so it was just struck. Amendment number 3033 had an errant 4 in the amendment. That was the Crago amendment for the veterans home. And then we inserted a word just for clarification. The amendment stands on its own with or without the word reversions, but House second reading amendment number 34 with the insertion of the word reversions makes it crystal clear that those are the funds that are at play there.
And so the 800,000 is the same. So really, the only thing that we change at the end is any actions that we take on the remainder of the bill.
That's correct, and we will track, which ones you've adopted versus amended, and then pick the one closest, either the Senate position or the House position closest, and we might have 1 or 2 additional revisions.
Okay, please proceed, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, now on item number 29. This was Senate second reading amendment number 2, Division 1. They added $500,000 for a YDOT study to assess the effectiveness and impact of YDOT's practices and procedures. Item number 30.
Was there discussion on what the purpose or the need was for this amendment?
Mr. Co-Chair, there was discussion. I don't have the original of the footnote here, but I think the idea is to try and find some efficiencies with YDOT. They seem to be perpetually short of funds, and there's always a question about how they are spending their money on some things, and so it was to see what the best practices are, I believe, from DOTs from other states, that there may be some kind of change in terms of how they select the projects that they fund.
Okay, thank you.
Item number 30 is also a Senate amendment, second reading amendment number 1, provided $2 million, and it is not identical, not similar, but it is related, I would say, to the next 3 items, number 30, 31, 32, and 33. All are related in one way or another. The Senate's position in a single amendment provided $2 million to provide financial aid to the state of Texas for expenses incurred by the state of Wyoming for appropriate resources. So basically $2 million for resources. The House position is covered in the next 3, 31, 32, 33. First of all, you adopted on the House side an identical amendment to the Senate, but then you came back and deleted that amendment. And in 2 actions, you added a total of $2 million, so the total amount is the same on both sides. But on the House side, their provision provides for the reimbursement of expenses by Wyoming law enforcement agencies for volunteers who assist with border state law enforcement agreements. So the House position is personnel, Senate's position is resources, a little bit of a difference there.
Go ahead.
Don,
Larson.
thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. And Don, would that second reading amendment number 3 allow those resources to go to other states and not with the Senate amendment number 1 really requires it to go specifically to Texas?
Mr. Chairman, the Senate amendment does require it to go to Texas. It specifically mentions that. The House amendment is not distribution of funds to another state. It is a distribution of funds to local law enforcement in the state of Wyoming. But those volunteers could go to New Mexico, Arizona.
Thank you.
Anything else on those notes before he moves on to 34?
So I was just curious on the Senate side, are there any other states that provide direct cash infusions to the state of Texas that we know?
Mr. Co-Chair, I can't answer that question.
Okay, thank you.
Please proceed, 34.
Item number 34 provides, it's a House amendment, third reading amendment number 1, provides $5.5 million in two different expenditure categories. First, $4 million for Office of Homeland Security hazmat, and subsequently $1.5 million also to the Office of Homeland Security for purposes of ERTs or emergency response teams, specifically related to the response to weapons of mass destruction.
And so, Mr. Co-Chair, I'm curious, so I believe that was a mirror bill, so is that right? And so that died on your side?
That failed in the Senate, and I was hoping to get the vote on that one here at some point. We have it. Elizabeth, do you have that?
Mr. Chairman, that amendment was divided twice. Elizabeth Martineau with Legislative Service Office. The first amendment failed 11 to 19, and the second division of that same amendment failed 14 to 16.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Coach, Mr. Senator Representative Larson.
Thank you. And Don, I believe could you verify that the amendment on the House side came back, it was killed it died in its first attempt, and second attempt was the amount was reduced by half?
I believe that was correct.
Mr. Chairman.
It's Representative Larson.
Walters.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Thank you,
Walters.
Mr. Chairman. On the Senate amendment, was it at the higher value of close to 8 million, or was it at the half the value at the 5.5?
Mr. Chairman, it was at the original value of 8 million, 3 million, I believe.
8 million, 3 million. Okay. Anything else on 34? All right, please proceed.
Item number 35 relates in part to item number 37, which is at the top of page 3, so you might want to flip back and forth. Item number 35 eliminates the Joint Appropriations Committee footnote, which prohibited the expenditure of funds by the Secretary of State to initiate or participate in out-of-state litigation. That was the Senate's position, and it was removed from the JAC introduced version. The House position added that same language on a prohibition of expenditure of funds appropriated to 4 of the top 5 statewide elected officials, inclusive of Secretary of State, State Auditor, State Treasurer, and Superintendent of Public Instruction, wherein the House amendment added 3 of the top 4. Secretary of State was already included in there.
Mr. Co-Chair, if we start restricting who can litigate, we may both be out of a job here before too long.
I don't know, the current one has about 36 suits going on right now.
Okay, number 36.
On the bottom of page 2, the last item, item 36 provides a placeholder for any constitutional resolutions that the legislature may adopt in this session, and provides funding for publication costs to the Secretary of State. Since this action has been taken, only one of the constitutional amendments remains. So if you do wish to delete and further amend this, the correct number as of noon today is 54,000 rather than 171,000.
Okay.
Item number 38 at the top or near the top of page 3. It is very closely related to item number 39. These are both House amendments. This amendment permits or authorizes the state treasurer to invest up to $15 million per year in low interest rate, 3.5% first-time home buyer mortgages. And the source of that investment would be the Legislative Stabilization Reserve account. $15 million a year, first-time home buyer mortgages, 3.5%, and the source of the funds is LSRA.
Any questions on that? Mr. Co-Chair. The only comment I have is, you know, I remember when this program was in effect in the 80s, my wife and I got a WCDA first-time home buyer's loan at the bargain interest rate of 14 7/8, down from the 20% that was being charged by the banks. We're not quite that desperate, but it's interesting to see this program revised. Okay, please proceed.
Item number
Mr. Chair.
Representative Larson.
Yeah, thank you. So Don, just again, if we may, so one takes it out of the PMTF reserve account, and the other takes it out of the LSRA.
That's correct. The final position of the House is the
The
LSRA.
LSRA, correct. Thank you.
And Mr. Co-Chair, I think that was an amendment by you. Tell me the rationale for switching the funds. Not that I'm opposed to it, I'm just curious what the rationale was.
Sure, I mean, obviously, from the work that we did last year, the whole concept of it and the language in the bills that we brought was that the reserve accounts are basically being invested in medium to long-term returns. And so we don't want to use them, a reserve account as a checking account or as a means to backstop programs like this.
Okay, makes sense. Please proceed.
Item number 40 and 41 are nearly identical with one important difference. This provides for land exchange and a long-term land lease of the military department. On the lease portion, the difference is the Senate position deposits the proceeds, which is $13.357 million, into the common school account within the permanent land fund. On the House side, the deposit is made to the appropriate account by law. The appropriate account by law is the common school permanent land income fund. So the House side has a lease going to the income account. The Senate side has it going to the corpus.
Questions? All right, proceed.
Item number 42 provides $100,000. This is a House amendment, third reading number 6, $100,000 to the Attorney General's office for purposes of investigating the efforts that fail to comply with the statutory requirements regarding campaign advertising. Item number.
And I'm curious, Mr. Co-Chair, who would hire this third-party contractor? Do we know, under this footnote, who hires this third-party contractor? Is it the AG's office?
Yes, I think you're looking at the next one regarding the cold cases. Excuse me, the 42, the Attorney General's office is the expenditure of those funds. So they would be the ones administering the contract to investigate those electioneering activities.
Okay. And Mr. Co-Chair, what was the discussion on the necessity for this on the floor? I'm just curious. I'm not necessarily opposed. I'm just curious what the.
Go ahead.
Representative
Mr. Chairman,
Walters.
if I may, I'll help answer that. I think the question was, in recent years during campaigns and even in off years, there's been a number of unsolicited mailers going out with no representation as to who was the funding source behind those mailings. And I think in a negative manner to whomever the mailers were about. And so it was to figure out who's sending these out and talking ill of others without claiming credit. It was the discussion on the floor.
Okay, and there's a threshold determination as to whether or not it's actually campaign advertising? Is there a provision made for that in the note? You know, just the fact that there's a mailer attacking somebody. I've been the subject of a number of those. I still don't understand. It puzzles me, but.
I told them to stop doing that.
Yeah, exactly.
Mr. Chairman.
Is there a threat? What's the mechanism in this note for determining whether it's in fact campaign advertising?
Mr. Chairman.
Please.
I believe it's as prescribed by law in the campaign laws of our state is how this notice is structured.
Okay, thank you. Please proceed.
The next item, item number 43, also a House second reading amendment number 50, provides $285,524 for purposes of one FTE. This is an ongoing appropriation to investigate cold cases. Of that amount, $75,000 is for contract investigative services.
And Mr. Co-Chair, I'm curious about the division. Why a $75,000 split for contract investigative service? Do we know how that number arrived and how the 285 number was derived? Representative Walters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This was an issue that the Joint Judiciary Committee worked on through the interim, was our understanding, or the representation on the floor, and that they're the members that came up with the numbers based on what they had learned throughout the interim.
Mr. Chairman.
Representative Larson.
So what we heard from good Chairman Judiciary is that technology has changed, and so they wanted to have one full-time employee in that office and then the ability to have resources to help with the contracting for the various technology changes that allow them to, on the cold cases.
Okay. Thank you. Next item.
Item number 44, Senate Second Reading Amendment number 13 is a deletion of $5 million from the State Park and Historic Sites budget, and it eliminated the Arboretum.
Okay. So if you want to add money to that, we'll probably make an exception for that.
You know, I've got a note here. I can't read my handwriting, but it might say something like that. Okay, next item.
Item number 45 and 46.
Please, Representative Larson.
So if I may, on 44, so that $5,000 was in the budget bill,
5 million.
right? And that's where the footnote 7 came from, so it was in the bill as it came out then. I just wanted to verify that.
That's correct.
That's correct.
Yeah, okay. Please proceed.
Item number 45 and 46 not only are closely related, they actually came from or originated from the same Senate Third Reading Amendment number 5. It was divided on the Senate floor. This changes the funding source for the Board of Control, Interstate Stream Division and Administration in part from Water Development Account 1 to the general fund. The total is $16.9 million.
I've never seen this before. I don't know where it came from.
It's just, it's, the hits just keep on coming, Mr. Co-Chair. Hits just keep on coming. Okay, deja vu all over again, right?
Items number 47, 48, and 49 are all related. The net difference here between the Senate's position and the House position, you both added $5 million for invasive species and particularly plants and grasses. You also both changed the distribution of these funds to a grant program, for example, grants to weed and pest districts. The difference here is the House side eliminated the 3-to-1 matching requirement. The Senate side retained the 3-to-1 matching requirement.
So, Don, my recollection, we eliminated it only to the extent that it had to apply to each grant, so that the total number had to be 3-to-1.
Well, Mr. Co-Chair, I thought that was the original language. The
Okay,
original-
That's
so-
what I'm just trying to figure out.
Initially, JAC's action was it applied to every grant, then during JAC round robin,
Okay.
that was the amendment you're recalling, and then the House struck that sentence entirely and the Senate did not.
Craig amendment.
Remind me which line item we're on, 47 to 49.
I believe we've addressed all on page 3 and are now on the top of page 4. Well, when you read through these, there's always something that you wish you would have done differently. In this case, item number 50, 51, and 57. 50, 51, and 57. Boy, I wish that was 52, but it isn't. These are all footnotes related to the Department of Health and prohibition on the expenditure of funds related to gender transition, gender reassignment, or any procedure or purpose procuring or performing abortion. The differences between the two houses appears within item number 57. Item number 57 makes an exception on the House side for purposes of incest, sexual assault, or the life of the mother. The Senate does not make such an exception.
Okay,
Item number 52, this is House Third Reading Amendment number 81. This puts limitations on the demolition at the Wyoming State Hospital in Evanston, and specifically calls out, I believe, 4 buildings, as well as a prohibition to infill the tunnels with their demolition activities.
So, Mr. Co-Chair, and perhaps to Representative Larson, I remember the testimony that these things were beyond remediation. I'm interested now that there's somebody looking at it as an economic development project. And the House agreed to the halt. What did you hear that we didn't hear during committee meetings?
We didn't really hear anything new. There is a phase one of the demolition that the RFPs went out last Friday, and the buildings that they are demolishing, that are scheduled to be demolished in this, included 4 buildings and some tunnels out of the sum total, that they was really hoping not to demolish it this time, hoping that within a year that the city of Evanston would have an additional year to work through and see if they could negotiate some type of ownership on the rest of the campus, as well as those 4 buildings. The overall phase one demolition of the project is going to take a year before they consider or start phase 2 or phase 3 and however that went. So the House in that conversation said, in meeting with Department of Construction and Department of Health, didn't figure that would impact that phase 1 demolition too adversely. They'll continue on with phase 1, excluding those buildings.
So the halt is to 4 buildings that were part of that original RFP, but they'll just skip over those for now?
Correct.
Okay. And then I understand the other thing, these are trust lands. Somehow, I don't know whether the city's hoping that they would be granted these as economic development or something, but somehow I thought these were tied up with our original land grant or territorial admission or trust lands or something.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, I think your assessment is pretty accurate. I think we've kind of deferred to the city of Evanston over the last number of years to at least give them the opportunity.
Okay.
They just want to keep trying, and
Understood.
And this was kind of, they says, if we can just have one more year, if we don't get it done, fine, move on.
Okay, I get it. I've been a mayor and been frustrated with the legislature plenty, so it's probably nice to give them the halt. Thanks. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I believe the next item is 53, which is related to, in part, item number 54. The Senate position was to move $16.69 million from the school foundation program to the general fund for purposes of funding preschool children with developmental disabilities. So the Senate position does not change the total amount of dollars that JAC recommended. It changes solely the funding source. The House position added $4.1 million of new funding from the school foundation program for this purpose. A little bit of background on this one. The Department of Health requested $16.3 million in their request. The governor requested $12.3 million. JAC concurred with the governor's recommendation. And then the Joint Education Committee, I'm just refreshing the memory, the Joint Education Committee asked for $26.2 million, $26.156 million, just as some context for this discussion of the total amount of dollars at risk.
And Mr. Chairman?
Representative Larson.
And then I think that the Senate's position is that it would come out of general fund, and the House position is that it would be school foundation. Is that
Mr.
correct?
Chairman, that's correct.
Correct, but we're together on the dollars.
Yep, correct.
Yep. Okay?
Actually, I don't think we are correct, the same on the dollar.
No, the House is at 4.1 million higher than the Senate. It is confusing because there was already $4 million of school foundation program funding in their standard budget before you added the 12.5. So it looks like when you moved 16.6 from the school foundation program to the general fund, oh, that's the same 16 million as the House's position is, and it's not the case. The House is at a different fund and $4 million more than the Senate.
And so, Don, the $4 million previously allocated, that came out of school foundation dollars, not general funds.
It did, and the reasons behind that is the state was facing financial challenges, and wanted to add the $4 million. There was $4 million available in the school foundation program at the time, and there was not $4 million in the general fund, and that is carried forward for about two and a half biennia.
Anything else on that one, folks? All right.
Item number 55 adds $1 million for the Wyoming Home Services Program. This program's standard budget, just for background, is about $6 million. The House added $1 million. Item number 56 adds $314,000 for senior center grants. The standard budget was about $10.2 million. JAC added $200,000. The House is adding an additional $314,000.
Mr. Co-Chair, not that I'm opposed to funding for seniors. I hope someday I'll be one. But what was the origin for this? It wasn't in the governor's budget. It just,
Well, it was primarily to benefit senators, being the more senior branch of the government.
Mr. Chairman.
Representative Larson.
So this was an amendment that came from the House where they felt that there was, the attempt was to take a like amount, $314,000, I believe, out of the Business Council. That failed. And the second part of that amendment, putting it into this account for additional grants to the senior citizen centers passed. And so we acknowledged on the JAC position that we had put in $200,000, and the body felt like the additional 314 was acceptable, if you will.
Okay, thank you. That's a good point. So, Don, in the JAC budget, there was an increase of $200K on the senior centers. How about on the home services?
I don't believe it. Mr. Chairman, we'll check, but I don't believe there was any additional funding for home services.
Okay, and then I'd appreciate it if staff could provide to me and the members of my committee just a little bit of background on the home services program and how these grants go out to the senior centers. I'd like to refresh our recollection on that. And if you want, we can, Representative Larson.
Don, if you wouldn't mind just verifying, but I believe if we go back a couple of years, step 2 and step 3 reductions, remember, in home services, then we pursued to see if there's an opportunity to get 1115 waiver to help cover those that come back without much success. I believe in this year's budget, the exception request was then to put that amount that we had been funding with one-time dollars back into their standard budget amount. I think it's 2.7, whatever that amount was. And so we had been using ARPA dollars and other reversions to fund that. And their exception request, which we adopted in JAC, was to put that back in the standard budget. And then this was to add another $1 million to it.
That's the YHIS program. Is this the same as the YHIS program?
Yeah.
Okay, well, if you just get me a little bit of information for our folks, and if you want it as well, just on the background that he described, and so I do understand the YHIS. I'd like to know what the grants for the Wyoming senior centers are, and the standard budget, the budget request, and what JAC put in, just be helpful for us. I've got some catching up to do on those senior center things. Thank you, Mr. Anything else on that before we move on?
Mr. Chairman, I wanted to clarify, I think Representative Larson did a great job of cleaning up my explanation. There was no added money, but it was indeed one time last biennium, and you made it ongoing this biennium. Item number 57 we touched on because it was related to item 50 and 51. So I'll move to item 58, which provided $1 million. $850,000 of general funds, $150,000 of federal funds for foster care provider rates. The next item, item 59, very similar, added $2.4 million general funds for provider rates for group homes, RTFs, and BOCES. Item number 60, also a House amendment, so all three of these are House amendments. This provided a total of $6 million for the summer EBT, that's the Electronic Benefit Transfer Program for Child Nutrition, 1.15 million of which is general fund, 4.75 million of which is federal funds. And this is a one-year program only for calendar year 2025.
Mr. Co-Chair, or staff, if you can tell me how this program works exactly. I know what the EBT is, that's the old food stamps. How does a kid going to home from school end up getting this school lunch benefit? And how does it differ from the assistance the family already receives? Representative Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This amendment to the budget on the House side originally came through as one going to the Department of Education. This is kind of through USDA, I believe, a federal program that the intent is to provide children during the summer who don't have access to meals and whatever, as we understand, to get one of those cards. The Department of Education kind of was pushing back and saying this didn't fit real well because they don't administer the food stamp, the SNAP program. And so in the House, there was a change that we moved that over to DFS. The department said one of the benefits of it being in DFS, as you recall, they have that real-time verification to see if the families qualify as a SNAP, qualify for the conditions of SNAP. It's intended to be for those children, and for children, they can get the SNAP card, be able to get the nutrition that they would like. There will need to be a coordination between the Department of Education and the Department of Family Services, as I understand it to some degree, with the free and reduced lunch population. And there's been some communication, my understanding from the governor's office through the USDA to see how to see that this gets implemented. And the intent of having this be in 2025 gives us a year to figure out what doesn't work. If we need to come back in the supplemental budget and adjust it or do away with it, we would have that option.
So who gets the card?
The child.
The child's given one of these cards. So they're.
Mr. Chairman, I say that's the best of my understanding. It's issued in the name of the child, I think would probably be the more accurate way to say that.
Maybe staff can just get us a little bit of follow-up information on how that thing works. This is the kind of topic I'd really wish we'd been able to vet during JAC rather than a floor amendment. Anything else on that one? All right.
Mr. Chairman, items number 61, 62, and 63 are all directly related. Both the Senate and the House adopted $75,000 for the Livestock Board for the acquiring mammoth jackstock donkeys. In the Senate side, you removed that amendment. The House side kept or retained that amendment. Item number 64, Oil and Gas Commission. You deleted on the Senate side.
So we're just kind of curious, how come the Senate doesn't like mammoth jack donkeys?
It befuddles me as well. It really does. I just, I'm stunned that we put it in and took it out. It just shows how volatile the politics of jackasses can really be.
Item number 64, the Senate side removed the footnote requiring the Wyoming Oil and Gas Commission to review its state processes and plan for funding its major maintenance. You'll recall the facility in Casper, it's its own facility. However, the Senate did add similar language in section 313, or 308, excuse me, which is the major maintenance section.
Mr. Chairman?
Representative Larson.
So Don, can you tell me what the difference was in the section 300 versus what we had in the bill as it left JAC?
Mr. Chairman, the primary difference is the JAC directed the Oil and Gas Commission to conduct that study, and in the Section 308 difference on the Senate side, they're directing the State Construction Department to conduct that study instead.
Thank you.
So Mr. Co-Chair, Representative Larson, we just thought the Construction Division was probably more adept at doing that than the Oil and Gas Commission. And, but we still made provision for the planning for the major maintenance. Anything else on that one? Okay, page 5.
Mr. Chairman, page 5, I think we've addressed item 65, and we'll move on to item 66, which is the Wyoming Tourism Board. The Senate side, in Senate Second Reading Amendment number 31, reduced the tourism appropriation by $2 million and deleted the footnote related to grants recognizing the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. Item number 67 is a House amendment, House Second Reading Amendment number 24, added $500,000 for any Wyoming airport selected as the site for the National Championship Air Races. Item number 68, also on the House side, House Third Reading Amendment number 15, the House added $150,000 for feasibility of a comprehensive establishment of a Veterans Museum in Casper.
Mr. Co-Chair, I thought a couple budget cycles ago, we did fund a Veterans Museum in Casper at the airport. Is my recollection wrong? Representative Walters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There is an existing state-funded, state-owned Veterans Museum in Casper, so there is some confusion on the language in this budget amendment. There has been no major expenditures from the state towards that project prior to this.
So I'm sorry, what's the confusion on the budget footnote? If it already exists, why are we doing a study to create it?
That's the confusion on the footnote.
Okay.
But the desire to continue the operations is still there, and that's why the House supported the idea, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
So I do have a question, and that's, when does the final selection for the potential championship air races occur? Do we know that? Does someone know that?
Mr. Chairman?
Please.
Please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The final selection will probably be out within the next month to 6 weeks, is what I'm hearing.
And
Is this a Reno Air Show, or are we supposed to say Reno? Reno Air Show.
Mr. Chairman, Reno was the previous location, correct?
so do we know what the 3 finalists are?
Mr. Chairman, I'm not aware of who, other than to know that a Wyoming community is one of the finalists. I don't know the other 2.
Okay.
Okay. Anything else on that? That's the air show, and the tourism board is just a prime target for appropriations, isn't it? All right, 69.
Item number 69 is Senate Third Reading Amendment number 12, moves the University of Wyoming block grant into alignment with the budget requests of all executive branch agencies.
Okay. Representative Larson.
Sorry.
So can you help me with some of the conversation on that? What was, in light of the history of moving it out of a budget into a block grant in 89 and 90, and then, getting to the point where we're at now, why they want to, what the thought was with that amendment to move it back into some sort of a budgetary submittal?
I'll draw upon my memory as best I can. I think that there was some research done by staff at request of the Senate Appropriations Committee as to what the origin of the block grant was, and it turned out it wasn't legislative action, it wasn't a bill, it was just an agreement by then Governor Geringer that they would put him on this block grant process. So it's never actually been anything formal. And I think the feeling on the Senate floor was that the university would benefit from a little bit more transparency. It's supposed to be a block grant, and yet here we're always receiving requests for additional appropriations. And if you're going to be appropriating line items here and there, you may as well just take a look at the budget like any other department It certainly bodes no ill will for the university. I didn't hear any of that. I think the conclusion of the floor was the university would benefit from the transparency. Mr. Representative Larson.
So as I read the history, I was led to believe that the legislature had adopted doing the lump sum, and maybe I've misunderstood that. Is Mr. Richards, do you know if that, there's never a bill, but the JAC or the legislature by accepting the governor's letter, how does that work?
So I believe I wrote the paper on this about 20 years ago, and then this occurred 10 years prior to that, at the end of the Sullivan administration, beginning of the Geringer administration. And I believe Senator Kinski is accurate in that the governor at the time, Governor Geringer, and it was a two-stage process, moved Section 1, Section 2, Section 3 into a consolidated budget, and the state stopped appropriating the other funds being federal research grants of professors and tuition revenue, athletic gate fees and the like. And then I believe the Governor Geringer requested the budget, the Joint Appropriations Committee consolidate the line items as well, meaning the various different divisions. And I don't recall the exact year, but early 90s, the Joint Appropriations proceeded with that governor's recommendation and has complied with that practice in the past 25 to 30 years.
Thank you.
So, Mr. Co-Chair, I'm curious if there was a presentation or discussion on the floor of the process that UW currently goes through to put together their annual budgets, because I've sat in on some of those meetings, and it's incredibly detailed and specific, and all the specificity you could ever imagine you would want in it. If the legislature so desired to see and review what their budget is, it's a pretty simple thing to do, but it's fairly comprehensive. Is that a fair statement, Don? Because I think you've seen those budgets before.
There were two questions there. Let me answer the first. We did not have a presentation on the process UW goes through for their budget.
Go ahead, Don.
Yes, my experience is it is fairly involved, not unlike other internal organizations where it moves up from a department to a college to the university, and then multiple meetings with the boards of trustees. Their full budget, not unlike Game and Fish, YDOT, is published online. It is in somewhat of a different format than this budget, but for example, we're moving on to diversity, equity, and inclusion. That number of $1.7 million comes right out of their budget. We access it for purposes of research requests of this committee.
Anything else on 69?
So in order to implement 69, would they be putting together a biennial budget, as this is worded, versus their annual budget?
Mr. Chairman, yes, to comply with this, it would be a biennial budget. Now, they could subdivide it as they chose once they received it, but their submission would be a biennial.
Thank you.
Representative Walters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Was there any discussion about running afoul of the Article 7, Section 17 in the Constitution that discusses that the university shall be governed by the Board of Trustees?
What was it? Article what?
Article 7, Section 17?
No, and I think I don't think we intend to deprive the trustees of that role. Simply, we do appropriate, we're the appropriators, so I don't know that it would run afoul, but if you've got a legal opinion that it does, then I guess we can take a look at that. Again, we meant no ill will towards the university. We think this is good for the university in the long run. More transparency, more oversight.
Yeah, the ill will doesn't come to the next paragraph.
All right. Speaking of which, let's segue on to 70.
Item number 70 is Senate Third Reading Amendment number 13. It prohibits the use of the expenditure of general funds, federal funds, or other funds under its control for gender studies courses, gender study academic programs, co-curricular programs, or extracurricular programs related to gender studies.
And Mr. Chairman, I would add that the Senate also added the provision that the students who are currently participating in those programs would be able to continue their education, and then once those students have graduated, that is when those programs would cease.
So, Mr. Co-Chair, were there any discussions about federal dollar requirements and for grants and for any other type of components for dollars that come to UW, and how something like this may impact those grants or federal dollars? And Dawn, if you are aware of anything, or if UW has looked into that, it's just something that I think would be useful for us to know.
And we've got somebody from UW here. I'm sure they'll make a note of it and get some information to us. Yeah, Mike Smith's here, so he'll get that to us then. Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. Representative Larson.
If we're going to make a policy stand on the programs that the university is allowed to make, or the social issues, it just seems like that would better fit under its own respective legislation. Was there any conversation about that?
You know, we had a lot of conversation on the floor about the constitutional restrictions of what can be in a budget bill and how often they are sidestepped. I mean, you know, we've got capital construction in this bill. We've got all kinds of things in this bill that constitutionally probably ought to be a separate bill, standalone bill, and yet here we are. So, you know, that was part of a very long discussion that thread throughout the Senate consideration of the budget, which is, you know, one minute you're advocating against an amendment because it ought to be in a bill, and the next minute you're running an amendment that looks like it ought to be in a bill. So
The good news is, by the time we're done serving the legislature, we're all constitutional experts. Thank you.
71.
Item number 71 is also a Senate third reading amendment number 41. It decreased the block grant fund state aid for the University of Wyoming by $1.73 million, and further specifies that no funds from that appropriation may be expended or shall be expended on the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion.
So same questions, obviously, on that provision as well.
The question being, for the university as to whether it impacts any of their federal funds. Okay.
Item number 72 and 73 are very close. Both the House and the Senate appropriated $250,000 to the University of Wyoming Family Practice Residency Centers for purposes of counselors, adjunct faculty, for suicide prevention, veterans, mental health, Medicaid management. The difference here is the House included prenatal care for pregnant mothers. The Senate did not. Item number 74. This is Senate third reading amendment number 18. This was a footnote added by the Senate on the University of Wyoming's budget to work with the Wyoming Crop Improvement Association and the Joint Ag Interim Committee to develop an MOU or other agreement for the operation of the Wyoming Seed Certification Services.
So, Mr. Co-Chair, could we get a little background information on this?
You know, I'm afraid I'm not able to. My committee members have pretty strong recollection on this. I know it went through two amendments. The first one went down because it looked like it was moving the program, and then the second amendment just required an MOU or agreement. Representative Senator Larson, you have some background for us on that?
Yes, thanks, Mr. Chairman. There's been a little bit of turmoil up in the area, up in Powell, up in that area on this. They were working real well together, the seed certification, and then the farmers up there that had a group. And right now, they kind of dropped the farmer group out of the equation of trying to make sure the program runs really well. And so that's pretty much it. I mean, there's been been a little bit of turmoil up there. They're afraid they won't get their seed certified correctly and all that.
Mr. Chairman.
Representative Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Larson, I have it in my mind, and please correct me, but I thought that was under Department of Agriculture.
Mr. Chairman, no, I think that's more on the, man, I need help on that. The seed certification is actually when they go out in the field and certify that the field is clean. And the other one is actually when they're testing the seed for varieties that aren't supposed to be there, weeds or whatever. But I think the one that tests the seeds itself is under the Department of Ag, if I'm not correct.
So, Mr. Co-Chair, I'm just curious why UW is involved and how they are they mediating between the two entities, or have they picked a side of some sort?
Mr. Chairman, they're at the experiment station, and that was kind of the whole thing, was they were using the building and using the UW as the means to get, the employees and their compensation and all that.
Mr. Chairman?
There we go.
I heard somebody, was that Representative Walters? Yeah.
Just got a note here. It's a seed lab is under the Department of Ag,
Okay.
and the seed certification was through UW.
Seed cert, so seed cert is UW, and seed lab, I'm not sure what the difference is, but is ag. Okay. Representative Walters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A little more clarification from the good senator about the facility in Powell that you're referencing. You say they are doing this and they are doing that. I'm not sure who is doing what at the seed. Is it the seed lab, or seed lab is in Powell, owned and ran or operated by Department of Ag or by the university? There were a lot of days in there, and I struggled to follow who was doing what, where, and when. If we could get a little more clarity, that would be great.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman. The seed lab, they're both located at the experiment station of UW's. The seed lab is ran through the Department of Ag. They made an agreement, I think, and then the seed certification is also at the same location. And they are funded through the UW with help from this farmers group. I should have the name better, their association.
Is that the Wyoming Crop Improvement Association?
Yes.
And they help fund which?
And they help to run the program so it would work better.
Which program, certification or?
Yes, seed certification.
Okay.
So this all deals with seed certification, where they go out in the field and actually say that there's no weeds out there, and they can go ahead and harvest.
Representative Larson.
Thank you, Representative Larson, but, and so if it's, I'm just trying to make the connection with what this Improvement Association does. So the Improvement Association must have an exercise or a process that then supports the experiment station. So what's the tie between what they do and the requirements of the university to run the experiment station, please?
Okay, I'll try again, Mr. Chairman. The Wyoming Crop Improvement Association has always worked with UW to run the seed certification program. And they've got, they had an MOU to work together, and it's kind of ended. And they're not thinking that the Wyoming Crop Improvement Association is very, very worried that the program is gonna not perform like it has been.
I see.
So they want to make sure we got an agreement with UW that they do have a say in what goes on with that program. It's like a $35 million program.
Did you say
statewide.
there is an MOU that's expired?
It's kind of been dropped. They didn't really have a written one, I think.
And it's 35 million or 3.5 million?
35. It's a big dollar amount for seed the farmers. Statewide, but mainly up in our area.
So Mike, could you get us a little short comment
Background on
on
that.
that and UW input and explanation?
Mr. Chairman?
Representative Walters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A question for Dawn and staff. Then the way it's written, as a condition of this appropriation, does that imply that if they're not able to come to terms on an MOU, that the appropriation would not go forward? Or what are is it a carrot and a stick? Is it just a please request, or a little more clarity on how that's drafted?
I think it is tied to the appropriation so that we have a clear nexus between the budget bill and the directive to the university. Unlike some of the prior amendments, and I think there's a future one on UW Family Practice Center, where there was a implied sanction if certain action was not taken, or even an incentive, which you have done, providing them an extra $5 million if they meet enrollment thresholds. That is not in the text of this amendment.
And, Mr. Chairman? another
Something else?
question?
Yeah, please, Representative Walters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And then the other question is to the Senate committee and their thoughts on why the Joint Ag Committee is going to be involved in this discussion.
And I'm going to defer to one of my colleagues on why Joint Ag would be involved in the discussion.
Well, Mr. Chairman, thank you. We would like to hear what is going on. We've been in this discussion with them for a couple, 6 months or so, when everything's kind of exploded. So we want to be involved and see if we can help out. So.
Anything further, Representative Walters? No, thank you. All right. If there's nothing further on the seeds, let's move on to 75.
House Amendment, second reading amendment numbers 25, which is line item 75, adds a footnote to specify that a portion of the funds may be expended for the shall be expended, excuse me, for the University of Wyoming to review opportunities for acquiring property in neighboring states. This is related to medical education, and then report back to legislative committees.
What are we thinking? We're going to build Mr. Co-Chair, why do we want to acquire property that near a regional medical teaching center? Are we still kind of angling on a mini medical school, or expanding WWAMI, or do you even know?
I would say, in general, all of the above.
Okay, so ambitious.
Item numbers 76 and 77 at the top of page 6 are related. It ultimately is defeated. So the House initially adopted a $100,000, I would call that a disincentive, on the UW Family Practice Center, meaning the funds would only be available if UW Family Practice did not offer or perform gender transition or gender affirmation or gender reassignment treatments. However, the House then deleted that same amendment. So at the end of the day, both bodies have the same position, and no comment on the UW Family Practice residency services in this regard.
So Don, the reason it's in here is we have to take some type of action, adopt the.
Yeah, we have to go back and get them vote together. We just have to deal with them.
Item number 78 relates somewhat, I think, to item number 75. This also provides that the university conduct a feasibility and cost study to expand WICHE, expand WWAMI, or engage in other agreements with other Western regional medical school universities. In addition, this same amendment added $1.3 million to expand up to, I believe that would be sufficient for 5 new medical students per year. So 5 the first year, 5 the second year. For the recollection of the committee, JAC added an additional $700,000. So with this amendment, it brings it up to a new $2 million.
Mr. Co-Chair, remind me, I know we've seen some of these, Representative Harson, over the years, a medical school, plan for a medical school, a study for a medical school. Have we done the studying, or have those been defeated, or did those studies not serve the purpose that's being called out here? Just refresh my recollection.
Mr. Chairman, I believe this differs from those prior efforts in that these are external to the state boundaries, meaning WICHE is sending students to other states. Expanding the WWAMI slots is with Washington and other public universities. I know there have been discussions of Colorado, Utah, and Nebraska as potential repositories for additional medical student opportunities.
Mr. Chairman.
And Representative Stith.
Mr. Chairman, and so the WICHE program is a particularly good value because it's much, much cheaper per student than the WWAMI program. And the WICHE program commissioners in August of 2022, because of inflation concerns, they deleted the funding for all of the medical students that get served through this WICHE program. So it's the background of that. So the initial Joint Appropriations Committee funding of $750,000 was to make sure that we could continue to have medical students at the University of Utah. So this expands that program in part because, again, it's about one-sixth of the cost per student of the WWAMI program.
I just want to make sure I'm clear on the nomenclature, because we keep saying medical students. To become a doctor, or a real doctor, that's WWAMI, right? And WICHE is other medical professionals besides doctors.
Mr. Chairman,
It
the WICHE does include veterinarians, for example, right? But the WICHE also does have medical doctors. There are 3 medical students right now in the WICHE program at the University of Utah Medical School.
Oh, okay, I did not know that. All right. And you, if I can, Mr. Larson, I just want to follow up with Representative. You said that they cut back on the funding, and this is restoring what was cut back?
Mr. Chairman, so the Joint Appropriations Committee in our base budget did restore the funding for those 3 existing students in the program, the medical school at University of Utah. This would seek to expand the program.
And did we have a request from UW to do so, or is this something we just, on our own, we decide we need more students in there?
Mr. Chairman, I'm not aware of a specific request from the university.
Okay, Representative Larson.
So the original, you'll recall, Mr. Chairman, the original reduction came in a step 2 reduction of the University of Wyoming's WICHE program. And then we had students, the reason we referenced the University of Utah is we ended up with these students at the University of Utah that was accepted into the WICHE program. The university was in a little bit of a flux in their health science, College of Health Science, and the person that kind of overseen WICHE. And last year in our supplemental budget, they didn't make a request to put that step 2 back in. So we found kids that were accepted in the WICHE program without any money. And so that first 715 that we mentioned in our JAC bill replaced that step 2 to where we had the funding that was replaced, that replaces the step 2 funding. And then this amount in this one is to increase for new student WICHE contracts across the whole WICHE program. So that can be physicians, assistant nurse practitioners, doctors, veterinarians, and alike, all of those professional postgraduate programs that aren't offered at the University of Wyoming, but are offered in the WICHE environment across the various universities that participate.
Okay, could you?
Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Please, yeah.
Mr. Chairman, I apologize for talking so much, but just to clarify, this funding and what the Joint Appropriations Committee did will not affect the funding for my daughter, who is a WICHE participant in the med school program at the University of Utah.
Okay, is she going to come back to Sheridan? What's her specialty?
Family practice.
And so she needs to be certain to apply to Sheridan. We'd love to have her.
Mr. Chairman, I will relay that message.
Okay. Don, could you just give us a brief history of the funding on this? I'm a little confused on the dollars, the step two. You don't need to do it now, just you can give it to us later. I just want to be able to follow the dollars. Okay. Anything else on Witchy Whammy? We good? Thanks for that discussion, representatives. 79.
Item number 79 directs the Wyoming Business Council to expend $250,000 for a feasibility study regarding the creation and expansion of a generic drug manufacturing or production in Wyoming with the intent to lower prescription drug prices. This $250,000 is not an additional or new money, but comes from the Wyoming Business Council's budget.
Okay.
Item number 80 is a Senate third reading amendment, and it is a reduction of $2 million for the Economic Development Laboratory. This was a governor's recommendation. JAC adopted the recommendation but made the funding one time rather than ongoing, and the Senate position is to eliminate it entirely.
Okay, then this note I have here about ongoing is in error. That's one time. Okay, I'll change that note. Thank you. That one time by JC motion. Okay, governor's rec, JC adopted, but one time. Okay.
Item number 81, again, is a carve-out of an existing appropriation. $8 million is designated from the BRC program for purposes of housing to attract and retain and expand Wyoming's workforce.
Don, we from two budgets ago, we have $5 million that we worked over in JAC. Could you reach out to the Business Council, see if any applications have ever been received for the $5 million that's been sitting there since, I think, one or two budget cycles ago?
Mr. Chairman, I believe Representative Sherwood has that.
Representative Sherwood.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. That $5 million was allocated through the Office of State Lands and Investments, not the Wyoming Business Council. And because some of the restrictive language that was tied that money to ARPA, they were not able to utilize it. So now it is in the money. We're reallocating it and cleaning up those restrictions.
Maybe you can give me a little bit of background on, or the Business Council or OSLI on what why that was tied to ARPA and what the language restrictions were. That'd be helpful to understand. Okay, thank you, Representative.
And Don, just a general understanding and explanation of the current total Wyoming Business Council appropriations in dollars or expenditures through the biennium, I think would be helpful.
Absolutely, Mr. Chairman. Just briefly on that point, the Joint Appropriations Committee appropriated $50.3 million to the BRC program. That's the Business Ready Communities program. And of that $50.3 million, $8 is being carved out for purposes of housing. So there would be $42.3 million remaining for the traditional economic development activities of the council.
And Mr. Co-Chair, I don't have all my cross-references down, I think, but here we've got this in Business Council. I've got C also, section 334, 5 million. That's the 5 million Representative Sherwood spoke of that I think is still parked in OSLI. If this 13 million is to stay, and I'm not a big fan of it, but probably we shouldn't have it in two different buckets. Probably ought to have at least one common description as to what its purpose would be. Just a thought. Okay.
Item number 82, this is House Third Reading Amendment number 21, and it amended footnote number 5, and the requirement for the expenditure of federal funds associated with the state small business credit initiative. This language was added in JAC to incorporate these federal funds in the standard budget of the Wyoming Business Council, and that language was, or at least a portion of that language was struck by the House. Item number 83, 84, and 85 all go together. 83 and 84 are quite similar to the UW Family Practice Center in that the committee would likely delete both of them. The Senate's initial position was to delete the $5.8 million for Wyoming Stable Token Commission. The Senate then restored it, and then finally in item number 85, The Senate added two different provisions in two different areas to direct preference or designate that the commission shall endeavor to contract with Wyoming domiciled entities.
So Elizabeth, I'm going through my list of amendments here, and I'm not finding these language differences here in this pile.
Mr. Chairman, you would not find that in your pile as it was just going back to the bill's position, so it was in the introduced bill.
Okay, if you could just get us a copy of the language that's in the bill, and
So what's the final position between the two houses?
5.8, we're just talking about the footnotes, I think.
Yes, the only difference now between the two bodies are on line 85, whether or not you wanted to, and it's not a requirement, it's a encouragement that the commission endeavor to contract only with Wyoming domiciled entities.
So, and I'm trying to recall, Mr. Co-Chair, what the rationalization or justification for the 5.8 million was. And I think that I was absent when that was in JAC. But could someone refresh our memory on that?
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Representative Larson.
Mr. Chairman, my recollection was that the Stable Token Commission came to us and then brought this as what they would need for that new agency's budget.
And Mr. Co-Chair, that's, my recollection is the bill said $500,000. And at the time, this is what I recall, the representation was that's all we need to stand the program up. And they came in and said, well, it's actually going to take more, but because we're going to make all kinds of money, it's a loan, we'll pay you back someday. And that's it. They needed more than they thought they'd initially need to stand the program up, the 5.8. They talked about different stages, and I'm still unclear whether this gets them to the final stage of actually issue stable token and taking in subscriptions, or if this is just an intermediate stage and there's going to be another stage beyond that. But I can't be much help to you, Mr. Co-Chair, other than that.
Mr. Chairman.
Oh, Representative Stith.
Mr. Chairman, my recollection of the 5.8 million budget request was that a good chunk of that is for personnel costs. They intend to hire 5 people, including the executive director. Of the $500,000 initially appropriated, they've only used $80,000. This 5.8 gets reduced by the amount that they have not used as of July 1. And then the other, and the two pieces of it, and I may have this transposed, but it was I believe the salaries portion over the biennium was about 2-point-something million, 2.6 or so, and then the remaining balance, 3 million and change of some kind, that was for a third party to develop and mint the stable token. And then again, they're not obligated to spend all of that, right? They do that through a competitive RFI, RFP process to make sure that they get both the quality and the security features that you would need. So that's my recollection of the agency budget request.
And Mr. Co-Chair, I'm sorry you missed that meeting, but if you get the materials, you may find of interest in there. And of course, the 5.8 is a done deal, but the European Union is $500 million into setting up their own stable coin. Texas is setting one up or has set one up. California, the dollars they're talking are quite a bit over the 5.8 million, but we just might be able to pull her off, never know. Okay, anything else on stable tokens? We've got 9 minutes before we lose our House counterparts. 87.
I believe 86, this is a divided amendment, provides that as a condition of the appropriation to the Department of Education, they shall assist JEC, Joint Education Committee, in the study of early childhood education.
And Mr. Co-Chair, I've got a question. Does this presuppose that this will be an interim topic for JAC? Or is this going to be a topic for JAC whether Management Council makes it an interim topic or not? How's this thing working? You know? No?
Nope.
Okay. All right. Representative Walters.
Mr. Chairman, this was a two-part amendment. There was this study, and the other half was a $250 million appropriation for this program. The House divided the amendment and took out the appropriation. and kept the study, just for a little more color to the discussion. That's what occurred in the House.
Okay, let me see. So we saved 250 million. Well, that's an important note to have. Okay,
Item number 87, House Third Reading Amendment number 26, also specifies that a portion of the Department of Education's appropriation be used for a statewide survey on the status of school district efforts for suicide prevention. Item number 88 provides for a reduction, this is a Senate third reading amendment, a reduction of 1 FTE in the Department of Education. That FTE is unspecified.
So how many FTE did we provide?
The Joint Appropriations Committee added 2 FTE, actually 3 FTE to this, 2 for the, yes, hard of hearing, and 1 in the fiscal division.
so Mr. Co-Chair, I believe this, my recollection is it started out as an amendment to delete the fiscal division position. The superintendent approached the sponsor of it, and this was a compromise that was worked out that they would, she could take it out of a vacancy if she wanted to, just decrease the authorized FTEs by 1. And so that she really wanted to keep that fiscal analyst that I think was added in round robin.
Item number 89 specifies that this is a House third reading amendment, specifies that the Department of Education shall document and then include in its standard budget for the next biennium funds or expenditures related to agriculture education, although not specified, it's FFA.
Okay.
Item number 90, 91, 92 all relate to the Wyoming Gaming Commission. Item number 90 adds $350,000 for 1 FTE. It is a temporary position in that it is available for 1 year. Item number 91 provides $343,000 for race day staff, up to 5 AWECs. And then finally, item number 92 makes those race day staffs and the appropriation of $343 million, $1,000 effective immediate.
And so
Mr. Co-Chair, we spent a lot of time on this gaming commission, and it's tough for me to follow the ins and outs. What happened here? Because I thought we had them pretty well taken care of before they left JAC.
I think those mostly are JAC. We didn't have the figures of the, how much to pay during JAC. The general consensus was to fund the new director and have him come on early, starting as early as January or July 1, because the current sitting director is supposed to retire sometime in November. So we wanted to have hands-on training for him and also have it paid at an adequate amount. We had those discussions in JAC, but we didn't know the figures. We didn't have the figures in front of us.
I remember that part.
So that's
That's the first one.
that's the first one.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Representative Walters?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And the next two, or the next one, is a continuation of those same discussions we were having in JAC during our February 6th meeting as to the needs of the Gaming Commission. Some of them are for, essentially for the track safety side of things, and that's why the $343,000 is for the AWACS during race days, to make sure that when you have overlapping race days, there's enough properly trained folks there for services to make sure there's track safety. Again, this was part of the discussion there in February. We didn't have the exact numbers, and they got back to us between February 6th at our final JAC meeting and the start of the legislative session.
Okay, so remind me, track safety, I thought that the gambling companies that were putting these races on were responsible for the races, and our gaming commission is just supposed to make sure that the games are not, that the games are fair, they're not fixed, and the horses aren't being doped. How do we get into providing track safety?
Mr. Chairman, I think you said it there just a moment ago. The Gaming Commission was the pari-mutuel commission. They managed all of horse racing, and they are the folks that make sure the horses aren't being doped, to use your terms, making sure the track is in an appropriate condition to run the races, because the operators, yes, they run it, but the gaming commission is that third-party verification to make sure that what they're putting out there is a safe and
So this is the regulatory function, is that right?
Correct, it's a regulatory function, and it is self-funded through the revenues generated by these individuals.
I get that. So what were we lacking in February 6th that we couldn't authorize the 5 AWECs at the time? Or they didn't know how many they needed? They didn't know how much they'd have to pay? What?
Mr. Chairman, they were still refining the number that they thought they needed, trying to be as conservative as possible, but still meet the needs that were out there.
Okay.
And so that's, and the purpose effective immediately is because race days start in May. So they need these on-site location AWACS prior to the beginning of the biennium.
Okay. Got it. Well, this is probably a good, we're at 3 minutes till, probably a good break point here, Mr. Co-Chair.
Okay, so can we resume on adjournment? We'll finish going through this. What's your schedule? It'll probably take us, we probably have at least another half an hour to go.
Yeah, I think so. We're on
$100
page
items.
7. We're moving along. You know, when you say on adjournment, that could mean we're waiting quite a while for you, or you're waiting quite a while for us. I'm not sure.
We can do it first thing in the morning.
Yeah, I think the morning would be, let's pick it up in the morning because we know what time. What's that?
Well, it depends on what we're doing.
Representative Larson?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I just, in our initial presentation, I just worry that the longer we put it off, the more challenge we have on staff as we start, if we're able to whip this up and get it out the door tomorrow, yippee-ki-yo-ki-yay, but.
So, we're moving fairly quickly now, and we're on to Senate bills. So my guess is we can be done at a time certain, and instruct the speaker to do that. So we could just say at 5 or 5:30. That way we don't, and if they're not done, they just won't have our votes on the floor.
Okay.
We need a whole.
5 o'clock? That sounds good.
Okay.
And I'll tell you, Mr. Co-Chair, we've got a little bit of time before we gavel back in. We're trying to go through here and identify some of these that they're just language differences that maybe we can start cleaning up. We can certainly clean up the first page, maybe after we get through the last pages, maybe we can get that first page taken care of and then start knocking off some of these items where we're essentially on the same page. We just need to clarify some of the language.
Yeah, well, let's see how far we get.
Yeah, all right. So 5 o'clock, see you at 5.